Tired of outdated marketing advice aimed at the industrial and manufacturing space? My name is Selim Malouf. Join me and my co-host Chris Carolyn as we deliver candid insights from growth-minded leaders, helping you drive results and tackle modern challenges. Cut through the noise to get no-nonsense expertise. Welcome to the Manufacturing Marketing Show. Caleb brings over a decade of marketing expertise to his current role as digital director at Strativise, an industrial marketing agency. He's previously worked in director-level roles and at Club Car supporting their digital transformation in a centralized marketing role. He and his wife have 2 kids and they live in Macon, Georgia, where he enjoys a good game of pickleball, disc golf, or chess, if he's not sharing a cringeworthy dad joke. Caleb, thank you for joining us and welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Very much looking forward to this conversation.
Chris and I, we've been working in industrial space for about combined 25 years, and all these organizations have always relied on their sales teams and their sales organizations to drive growth. And what are sales teams without their customer relationship management software? Am I right? The good old inbox where every single conversation is there, and sometimes we miss orders and such. So we start opening up an Excel sheet and we share it around. And at some point, the Excel sheet breaks and we graduate into wanting something more, let's say, professional. Then we start looking at, the word CRM. What does CRM mean to you, Caleb, and what it should mean to our listeners?
I mean, CRM stands for customer relationship management. And there's a reason for that. It's everything that relates to your customers, ideally in one place, right? Convenient for internal teams to synchronize around the same information, the same updates. You have one source of truth for how the customer thinks and feels about you. And ideally, you're not running around chasing hey, what was that spreadsheet link again? Right? We've all been there. Like, okay, you didn't bookmark it again, and had to resend it. So to me, that's what a CRM, that's its function, right? It allows your internal teams to more cohesively manage the relationship with the customer, or at least it should.
Yeah, I like that. And I guess as we get into the topic today of who owns this seemingly very important function. The challenges I've run into is that, these guys do a great job. Like, it is their life of creating these relationships, building these relationships over many years. They do own it, and they own it in their way. And we start to have challenges when, this kind of system works most efficiently when you have like 1 or 2, 3 people, like all alignment, like they all got into the business for the same reasons. They're all like, you don't have to teach them how to sell the thing that they made or that their friend made, so you don't need a lot of documentation of everything. And it just, you're just always connected, spiritually almost sometimes, right? When you try to scale and grow past that, that's when these older systems break down, right? And so as we introduce this concept, like, what are some of the challenges you've seen when it comes to, all right, we've got this bigger thing that needs to serve more people than we've had before, do more things than we've had before?
Yeah, I think, who leads the organization? And I don't mean like, oh, it's the CEO. Well, of course it is. But what you described, Chris, is a little bit of a sales-led motion, right? Okay, and for many companies, they are still very much sales-led out of necessity, right? Relationships are the driving force behind the growth of many of these companies. Now, good products as well, obviously, but if they don't know about you, they're not going to buy from you, and that's where the relationships come in. But as you grow and mature as a company, then you start getting more hands in the cookie jar, right? Oh, let's build out a marketing function. All right, well, marketing needs to align with sales and it needs to align with customer needs. What about if you get large enough to have a customer success team? Where does IT focus into this? Because at some point, you're going to have somebody own, crafting the backbone of your technology structure, whether it's, our network is down, our Wi-Fi is down, or maintaining the plant, right? Maintaining the machinery operations. And so as you grow, you start to have all these teams that need at least some sort of line of sight into the customer's data. And I think that's where a lot of the debate comes from, right? Is ideally, with anything in a company, you have an owner, because then you have someone you can hold accountable for that. And the CRM should be no different. But I think, getting back to your question of the challenges, I think usually there isn't an owner. It's just kind of this thing that everyone uses, or it gets thrown into somebody's lap, right? I think we've all been in situations where, oh, hey, congrats, you now own this thing, this platform. And you're like, what is it? Why do I have it? Yeah, and that doesn't end well. Usually for me, it's been intent data in the past. I had it and I was like, what am I supposed to do with this? We didn't get a good ROI on that. So I think the challenges are twofold. Number one is, do you have clear defined owners for everything? And it's not just your CRM, but that this is a scalable kind of process question to ask internally. And then two, can you understand how you roadmap for greater return on your investments? Because technology or your data or your processes, those are also an investment. And if they fall down, they will not scale as you try to scale, and then you are going to experience a lot of pain. Just like a spreadsheet doesn't work eventually, right? It breaks. Oh, great. Now we have a single point of failure for this data. That doesn't scale. That's just one example. Curious what y'all think, though.
Well, coming from the background of having been the marketing operations specialist that got the CRM handed to me because I'm the only one who cared enough to, go into the settings and show people, like, here's what we can do with the software that we already bought and installed. I have a lot of both opinions and emotions because I've been in situations where things break and there are out of my control, but I'm getting the blame. There are situations where I'm witnessing some operations that are happening that I could help with, but I don't have any jurisdiction over. And all of these situations combined point me towards two things. Before we think about who owns the CRM, we need to think about revenue operations and how, even though these companies never thought about it, when you talk about it, they think it's a nice to have. This is what the problem is. Once we figure out that we need a RevOps function, and then we set up the RevOps function correctly, then the question of who owns the CRM is very easy. It's the RevOps team. But with the current situations where the RevOps is an afterthought or even not even something they ever think about, then it starts becoming, it should be an IT project. And when we're talking about SaaS CRMs that live in the cloud, that's a whole can of worms that you don't want to open with IT, especially with industrial companies that typically are scared of cloud infrastructure and, deploy everything locally on, VPN instances and intranets and stuff like that. Or it falls into the lap of whoever's using it the most, which in my case was the marketing team. So for me, it's interesting when I watch these debates unfold in these organizations, because in the back of my mind, the whole debate shouldn't exist. We already have the answer. We just need to work together to accept the answer. But I'm interested in your thoughts about this.
Yeah. If I could just, I've had a recent revelation in that it's funny to me why we can't make this jump to revenue operations and thinking about CRM as a tool. And it's because of a current client. And I'm talking to him about, his involvement in the process of building out a HubSpot portal and, realizing and getting his agreement, like if you, because he's a smaller business, and if he understands fully how to take advantage of HubSpot, that is the best way for him to get ROI of the investment. And what's interesting is I started thinking like of other functions or other situations like this. And like as you grow a business, as you start one, you know, you inherently have to learn something to make sure the business runs, right? Whether that's getting really good at Excel so you can manage, you know, P&Ls that way, or it's accounting software that you don't like to use like QuickBooks, or it's an ERP, right? And all of that happens to be attached to the dollars and cents, right? So I'm thinking that gap, like since you can do a CRM without necessarily attaching it to the dollars and cents, it's kind of like there's this sense of I don't have to know how this works. I can delegate it, you know, to whoever. But in reality, the farther it gets delegated away from leadership, away from people that, you know, are really driving the business forward, the harder it's going to be to have success and alignment around, you know, how much of a great tool it can be for the business. Have you seen anything like that in your experience, Caleb?
I have, you know, and I'm with you on, and I have, I don't know if ranted is the right word. That might be too strong, but I have been pointed in my criticism on LinkedIn sometimes of the practice of, oh, we have a tech budget, and it's just this bucket, and just CRM or marketing automation or intent data or XY or data warehousing or pick a software, right? Pick a software, it just lumps it in the bucket, and then you just have the bucket. It reminds me of how, you know, back in the 90s, marketing would be the trade shows and the make it, you know, typically the make it pretty department. Oh, we need collateral, we need pens, we need mugs. That's still a problem today for some marketing departments where it's seen as the make it pretty department. That's a whole nother conversation. But that mindset of, okay, how do you impact bottom line metrics? That also is, I feel, lagging with technology investments, because I think just how marketing has been and sometimes still is seen as a necessary evil or a necessary cost of doing business. Maybe not evil, although we can turn into pretty evil people if we're pushed. Like if we get a CRM dumped in our lap, right?
Yeah.
But that technology is seen in the same way. Oh, it's just a necessary cost of doing business. No, it's not. It's not at all. It is an opportunity to improve your company at foundational levels that's going to scale with your business. It is not just a necessary cost of business. It is an investment. And how are you going to understand how to get a greater return on that investment? I've seen, and I'm sure y'all have seen, you know, instances of HubSpot or Salesforce is a big you know, player in the CRM space, or even I've seen smaller ones like Zoho and Pipedrive where 5% of the functionality is being used. I'm like, you're paying how much for this? You could have paid a 20th of the price to be using it for what you're using it for. You bought the name or you bought the potential and you haven't realized it yet. And that's a huge problem, because then you get duplication of technology or you get frustrated employees, suboptimal employee experiences, and operational inefficiency is I think the name of the game here, where improperly used technology just you know, leads to waste within the company. And a lot of companies cannot afford that, but they don't understand just how big the problem is.
You talking about duplication in the industrial space, the backbone of a lot of companies is the ERP, and has been a worrying trend in, you know, ERP development of let's just tack on a CRM module in there, and a lot of the times SaaS CRMs get purchased, and now you have two competing platforms, one that is fully featured that has so much potential and has a specific way of operating that teaches you how to do proper revenue operations, like a Salesforce, like a HubSpot, like the big names. And then you have the CRM module in the ERP that's usually typically just there to, shore up the start of the cycle where, okay, we need to fit in some kind of relationship management, but it's typically bare bones, and sales teams usually use that just, to tick a box to say, okay, I put in the required information to get this order through. In those cases, that redundancy is so big that they feel like, okay, we have a CRM module and a whole CRM platform, but we're not going to remove the ERP. So let's just remove the CRM and just use this little mini CRM here. And I've been in that situation. And at that point, that's why I am very adamant that CRM projects should not be with IT, because IT thinks like that, thinks like, okay, the ERP is the backbone. We already have a software that does something similar for quote unquote cheaper or for lower opportunity costs because it's already there, part of the ERP. And then all the effort that you put together building a proper CRM on a HubSpot, on a Salesforce, now all of that is gone. Well, not if you're using Salesforce, you're still on the hook for like 2 years or something.
Yep. I think it gets to and this makes me think of the insurance industry or the banking industry. When was the last time you swapped banks? Or when was the last time you swapped insurance carriers? Maybe it was recent for the two of you, but for most people, it's been a long time, unless they're forced to, right? Like I moved a couple of years ago, and then the bank I was with had one physical branch in the city I'm in now, which is Macon, Georgia. I moved down here from Atlanta. And I didn't switch because it was convenient, right? I had automation set up. I had, I still had the app, everything. But then they closed the branch. So then I said, to heck with this. I would like it to have a local bank where I can walk in if I need to. I probably don't need to, but I'd like the option. Only then did I switch. Only then, because I had a dramatic pain, did it force me to go through the annoyances of, let me update my payment information, my pay stubs. Let me, switch over, where credit cards pull from. And it's the pain of switching keeps you in place. And we see that a lot with the CRM systems, which is, it is going to be such a royal pain in the you-know-what to try to switch from a NetSuite, for instance. Oracle has some great things, but you think about them bolting on. They bought Eloqua a long time ago, right? Bolted that on, left it for dead for about way too many years, maybe 7 or 8. Finally just started investing in it. But you get these bolted on functions to the ERP, and that's not what the ERP was built for. I think if you ripped everything out, I think if some company leaders looked at their company today, especially in the manufacturing space, and said, okay, would I build, if I was starting from scratch today, would I build what we've built? Yeah, and you're nodding your head. No, because the answer is of course not.
I've heard it directly from them. If we're starting greenfield, yes, we would do what you're suggesting, but we have invested 10 years in customizing this ERP, and we're not going to move it.
It boggles the mind.
Because it's the pain of switching, right? It's that mindset of we have something that works well enough. And I do think there is an element of good is the enemy of great here as well. But you also think about juggling priorities, right? Okay, if this is fine or if it's functional, I don't have a roaring fire over here with my CRM system. I'm going to divert my attention elsewhere, or maybe towards growth objectives because I'm trying to scale something. And we have all seen how that can backfire 5-10 years later when all of a sudden you're stuck with systems that don't work, and then it's even more painful to try to untangle yourself from that mess. Oh, now you've spent 15 years customizing that platform, and good luck mapping that out to something that actually scales. But you think about purpose-built systems like a HubSpot, right? HubSpot has intentionally built themselves to be much more easy to use. Like I have a lot of marketers in my network who won't use anything else because it's that good. for what it was designed to do. And a lot of times with ERP systems, what were they designed to do? Not marketing. It's resource planning is what it's used for. That's not marketing, and that's really not sales either. To be honest with you, sales is being shoehorned into this system that wasn't built for them originally. And so we live in an economy of convenience. Hi, Amazon, hi, Walmart.com, hi, click now. But that mindset doesn't work when you're building a business. Convenience, and that gets back to some earlier statements that we have made around, oh, it gets dumped in your lap, or, oh, yeah, they can just manage this. Why? Because it's convenient? Is that really the right way to run? I would question that.
Yeah, and I think that's a good segue, like back to the importance of ownership, because when you mentioned the concept of it's working well enough, most of the time it's like, is it? Everybody hates the thing, but it's the P&L comes out okay. Sometimes you have to pull it into a spreadsheet anyways and then fix it. So your ERP that you're spending money on isn't even doing what it's supposed to be doing. But this concept of, is it working, has to go beyond, like you said, the ERP is made to manage margins, inventory, profitability, accounting. So when you tack on this customer relationship, customer communications need, of course, it does not work well. And anybody that is customer facing, working out of that system, is not having a good time, which means your customers aren't having a good time. So when you think about, so if somebody says that it's working well enough, whatever system we have, and there's this user, these users that aren't, it's just not working for them, right? How do you kind of try to transition their thought process into what it means to work well and really, support the business?
I think the key is in the wording. My typical question is, can you please define well enough? Right? Because it's a subjective term. Oh, I think it works well. Okay. What does well mean to you? Because something working well, meaning if I want to log in, it lets me log in. And then if I need to find the data, eventually I find it. That is a vastly different definition of working well than what I would bring to the table, right? Or any of us would bring to the table, especially when it comes to your customers. Chris, like you said, if your people are frustrated, that's going to come through in customer communications, whether they want it to or not, right? We're emotional beings. If I am irritated, how many times, like I was speaking to my cell phone provider a couple months ago. I just had an issue. Something on their side had just glitched. Not a big deal. Nobody's fault. The person I spoke to was quite irritable. Nothing that I said. I was trying to be super kind because their system had been giving her the runaround for 3 hours. And so she had 3 hours of bottled up frustration with an internal system that was coming out on my phone call. Now, thankfully, I was in a pretty good mood, at that time. But that's how you lose customers. There is a bottom line impact to this because you tick off your customers. And so, that's just one example, but we look at the CRM system. Well enough, okay, can your customer success or your IT or your marketing or your sales teams, can they get what they need quickly? What's the time loss if they can't? Have you actually asked this question internally? Because it's pretty easy to do. Anonymous email, you can do a SurveyMonkey, a Google form. There are ways to anonymize this so nobody feels like they're going to get in trouble for actually speaking their mind. That's a whole company culture question as well, right? Can people actually give you the feedback that, hey, this doesn't work? Because if they can't, you have bigger problems. That's an aside. But I think actually talking to your teams is where it starts. They're the users of the platform. What is working? What is not working? But it all gets back to, all right, what is well enough? Because what is well enough for the CEO logging into the CRM might be vastly different from what is well enough for the marketing team or for your sales leader logging into the CRM. Their needs are vastly different. And so finding the common definition around, it's almost like KPIs, really, right? What's your key performance indicator for this thing working? If we don't agree on what that is, then we're not going to define success the same way. So I think it starts there. And I think a lot of times with leaders in companies, they're not working from the same definitions. And so you get this cross-functional misalignment, which then leads to, all right, well, nobody really wants to take this on. Nobody actually owns it. It just sits there and festers for a few years. And then all of a sudden you have a big, expensive tech problem to unwind.
I'm glad you mentioned definitions because I have witnessed it firsthand when asking the question directly to leaders, is this working? And they say it's working well enough. In their mind, the assessment is the tech broken? Is it buggy? Is the implementation bad? But it's never, are the features that we need in the systems that we have right now? When they look at the system, they say, oh, it's not malfunctioning. It just doesn't have the extra features that we need right now. So we'll just get the ERP developer or like the CRM developer or whatnot to add these features, but they don't view it as the system is broken. And that is exacerbated when IT leaders get involved. And typically IT projects are viewed from the lens of, is it broken? Is it doing what it's supposed to? Cool. Then it's fine. It's working. And that is the frustrating part that I used to have in these conversations when I'm saying it's not working because the sales teams are not able to keep up with their contacts and customers. The service teams are having to be on calls with the sales teams to understand what the hell is going on with this account. Marketing teams are having to extract Excel spreadsheets of contacts and parse them every single time to be able to do any sort of communication. That is not working, but for them the software is not broken. And that's the disconnect that sometimes you never get the opportunity to like that gap. You cannot close it. I'm interested how you would approach it because you mentioned a key part of a successful CRM is culture. Sometimes one person cannot change the culture. If the culture is a challenge, what do you do?
It starts from the top, obviously. And so if you're a business leader listening to this right now, my question directly to you is, are you enabling your team to make progress or are you hindering them? The knee-jerk response is, of course I'm enabling my team. But really take a hard look. There is some self-reflection with management styles that comes into play here. But a leader's role is to cheerlead for your team, to block and tackle, to make their lives easier, and then to obviously set some strategic direction and set the guardrails and another conversation potentially to be had around that. But it starts there, and then I think there is a question to be asked around which problems are you willing to take on? We all have limited capacity, and sometimes we look at a system and we just go, I just can't, and to be fair, that is a real thing, right? And sometimes marketing gets stuck with other teams' problems. We've all had times where we've had to now. Everybody works together, right? We all should be pulling in the same direction, but that should be pulling is the key phrase here, because we aren't always doing that. And so if there is significant internal discord, shall we say, around how a system or a process is used, map it out. That's the action item here. Do you have this documented? Now, documentation is not sexy. It doesn't get headlines. It's not fun. I don't enjoy doing it. And this is where IT shines a little bit, right? And this is why sometimes IT by default does own the CRM, because they're dang good at documenting how things are used, which then uncovers insights as to how things maybe should be used. Other teams maybe need to get better at that. But the CRM system, okay, if this use case happens, let's say customer has a complaint around around a delivery of pipes that was done into the field, right? What is the process? What is the escalation process? Who is the point of contact? Where is that information stored? Because if, like you just mentioned, if service is running to sales going, what the heck is going on here? That's a problem. You have a process gap. The customer shouldn't be waiting on you to figure your stuff out. The customer wants an answer and wants it yesterday. And so it's not fun. And you do have to designate somebody to own this as well, right? Who's documenting these processes? Who is then, and then what authority do they have to drive change? Let's say I document this process and I uncover, but I'm in marketing and I uncover that, hey, we have a gap here. What do I do then? What next, right? Because finding something, you can have all the data in the world, but if you can't act upon it, what good is it? And this same concept applies here internally to, I've mapped this out, now what? And that comes full circle back to the top. All right, is leadership actually bought in and are they driving this forward? Because you need leaders, including the CEO, to say this is important. Because if they don't, and if they're not bought in, and if they don't want regular updates on this internal mapping, it's not going to get done. There's too many barriers. There's just too much other stuff everybody has to do. And it is a truly cross-functional collaboration that has to map out all of these processes. So unless you have somebody who's going to break down some of the natural barriers that come up, or just, hey, I want to help you, you're just not my priority. I'm not paid to help you understand this. I'm paid to help the customer, and I have 14 calls and in my backlog. Okay, well, you're never going to get on their list. You're never going to get on their calendar unless it's made to be a priority internally. That's my 2 cents, but I'm curious your experiences as well, and if you would differ.
I have to admit, I am guilty of finding a problem as a marketer and just painting over it. And because I know if I highlight it, I'm going to be saddled with fixing it. So
that's fair.
and that's the hard part. And like, what's frustrating at times, but also hopeful for me is that, I think you hit it right on the head. Like, documentation of current state and any possible future states is so important. And these companies know how to do this because they do it for their production line. They do it for their quality management systems in great detail, right? It's just, as I think what I'm seeing is, as the customer experience becomes more and more important to actually drive the business growth, it's just something they have not had to approach before. And when IT is the one that's good at charting the data and where it goes, they are not necessarily trained to think about things like, okay, the data looks really good going over here, but none of these teams can access it now that it's over here, right? And I loved your article, and I'd love for you to share, what you found, feedback from talking to each of these stakeholders. Because for me, it might be oversimplification, but you've got IT who wants it to not break, right? And be secure, usually. You've got service who needs super granular context whenever they need it, like pre and post sales, so that they can respond quickly. You've got sales who needs a similar level of context, but they can't let the system get in the way. They don't want to be in the system. They want to be building relationships. And then you have marketing who needs to use all of that information plus like theoretical stuff, right, to try and send the right message and then, respond while also communicating that to the rest of the team. And you have leadership who is just wanting the pulse of what's going on. And they've been very good at like looking at the quality data, the reliability metrics, like how is the business running internally, but now how do customers, how does that like correlate with customers that are actually the ones creating the revenue right? And connecting those dots. So as you talk to these different stakeholders, what kind of feedback, and maybe places for opportunity where are you finding?
Yeah, the article on LinkedIn, which Chris, you and I had some back and forth because you had some fantastic thoughts in response to it, right as well, which I certainly appreciated. So it's called just who should own, excuse me, the CRM in B2B. And I spoke with different functions. I asked some marketing folks, but I also asked a couple of leaders, even an old IT director who's now VP of IT over at Clubcar, who was a fantastic business partner. And it was fascinating hearing the different viewpoints. For instance, one common viewpoint I heard was, look, IT's power within larger organizations, including manufacturing, is growing. That and finance, because money is more expensive right now. The economic conditions make it so that, okay, if money is more expensive, every dollar, it has a greater pressure on it to be spent wisely. And so the CFO is kind of leading the charge, but IT is seen as they get stuff done. They're no fluff, and they're reliable. They are trusted as a department. And so they're going to come in and say, okay, what are we using and how are we using it? Now, to your point, Chris, there is some security involvement as well. You need IT to stand things up, right? And if you're somebody who's in marketing or sales and you aren't making friends with your IT department, today's a great day to start. Say hi. They're wonderful people, and they will be the ones to pull you out of the fire when that spreadsheet breaks. Or when anything breaks. So they will be your heroes then. Build that relationship now. But as I've been talking with other leaders, and I am
Caleb, if you don't mind, I want to make a distinction for all the industrials that are listening to us.
Yes.
When Caleb's talking about IT, he's not talking about the one-person help desk that deploys everybody's computers at your company. We're talking about a well-resourced IT team that owns not only the software infrastructure, the IT infrastructure, everything else, does security, etc. Just to clarify.
That's an excellent clarification, because I am envisioning like a club car where I've worked, which was a $500 million company ARR, and this was years ago, so I don't know what they are now, probably greater, and they had lots of people on the IT team, right? But if you're at a smaller company and you only have that one person who's kind of you're wearing multiple hats, you should absolutely be his or her friend, because that person is 100% going to be the person that pulls you out of the fire and drops everything else to do it. But in terms of, okay, how is this system used? The biggest thing is, okay, requirements gathering would be a starting point. How does everybody use it now, right? So leaders are popping into reporting and maybe looking at a dashboard. Okay, can your CRM pull in the data? Do you have a dashboard that actually makes sense? I am seeing the answer is often no. Hey, the sales data is hidden over in this pocket of your ERP over here, but then your marketing data is over here, and we can't connect the two. All right, well, now marketing can't tell you its impact on revenue. That's a problem, right? Because I don't care, how many social media posts you did. I don't care how many email sends you did. As a leader, I want to know, how are you driving the bottom line forward? That's the data I want. I as a leader would want marketing to bring to the table. There are challenges with that, right? Same thing for sales. Hey, sales is always the last mile. And within manufacturing, maybe it's more than that, because they have those relationships and is much more centered in certain industries around the relationships that you have in the field, the relationships that your service team has with those who are using your products. But that information, okay, how are you going to roll that up and report on what's the correct KPIs, and where does that information live? So I think as I've been talking to people within different types of organizations, right? Whether they provide piping, whether they provide fire pumps, whether they provide technology to kind of Internet of Things and monitor as well. It is interesting how the use cases differ internally, but there are a couple of common themes. Number one, what impact is it making? Number two, how easily can I find that information? And number three is ultimately, are we able to determine if something is working? And often the answer to number three is no. We can't determine if something is working. Now we have uncovered the problem, but the solution seems to is rarely straightforward, right? Because of some of the reasons we've already talked about. Good luck, maybe unearthing some of the previous iterations of how technology is used. I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, Chris, but I'm curious where you want to go.
Well, I think it can be straightforward, and that's why, like, that's ultimately the conclusion a lot of us get to outside of, the manufacturing space, because, something like RevOps, revenue operations, does exist in these other spaces. And it is very complex to solve when you don't have that, and you have these different stakeholders with different wants, needs, desires, all out of the same system. Inherently, when you give one of them the hat to take care of it, there's going to be blind spots and misses. So if you like, it's just not designed like for success in that way. And I think that's where, like, Selim, you highlighted the point of these one man, IT shows. It's IT happens to be like kind of the other side of the coin for me a lot, like of marketing, where they are generally the two support facilitators, champions of digital transformation. And prior to you having to digitally transform as a business, these functions were just less important, right? And you did not have to invest in them the same way that you invested in sales and production and service. Now you do, but it's very hard to prove how much you have to invest before like bad things happen, right? And if we can just, kind of flip the switch, understand that revenue operations is like one of the fastest growing roles, in America right now, like, because it's this layer of, for me, it's aligning the business operations to the customer experience in a way that empowers all the customer facing teams to do what they need to do on a daily basis. Unless you have somebody in charge of that, right? And that's where something like RevOps comes into play. It is very hard to get there, right? Because you either don't have the authority you need. If you do have the authority because everybody trusts you, like IT, you don't have the customer experience, like knowledge that you need to ask the right questions to gather the right requirements. People might be scared that they're opening some kind of spam test email from you, right? So they're reluctant to engage and tell you what they actually need, right? That's what I found is like when you do open the door, people have just said they've heard no for so many years on like what their needs are. They just stop asking, right? So I guess the next question is, why do you think, and maybe what can we do to help? Like, it's difficult for these companies, and I'm not saying it's easy to just change your org structure, right? It's not an easy thing, but to just make the decision to say, hey, this is a new function. Like, this is a new function for the business we've never had before. We should not try to like fit it into any other function. And if we do that, let's at least call it like it is. There's quality committees, safety committees. We can start a RevOps committee, right? Like take us through kind of your thoughts on maybe helping organizations transform like towards this, at least mindset, if not like actual roles within the organization.
You make a great point that org structure has a massive implication in how companies can evolve. And what's in a name sometimes gets a little overblown, and in this case, I think it can be because we're calling it RevOps, right? Revenue operations, and at its core, it is right. It's you're upgrading your operational efficiency, which is going to enable you to provide better customer experience, which makes you more money. So there is revenue and operations. It's an accurate term, but some companies may balk at that, right? Sales-led companies, or even founder-led sales for smaller organizations might go, well, that should be in the sales team. Okay, call it sales operations. Maybe, I've got a no here, so that's going to be interesting, right? But it gets back to who's going to own this. Do you have a designated person who is going to look at the technology, look at the processes, and look at how you are using technology today? Do you have a designated owner? Where they live is I think, gets back to the who owns, the CRM, or who owns this technology kind of conversation. For some companies, it might have to be sales because they may only have a one-person marketing team or a one-person IT team, and the resourcing is just not there. So is that ideal? I would say no. And in fact, the ideal use case that I think everybody should shoot for is what you've already mentioned. RevOps should be its own function, rolling up to a dedicated C-suite member. And for larger organizations, that's maybe easier to do. For smaller organizations, who's your revenue operations manager or director of revenue operations? They can report directly to the CEO, and should probably, because technology is that important to your business. So that's my off-the-cuff thoughts, but I've already seen a couple of no head nods, so I want to see where this goes.
Yeah, sorry, Chris. I've been in 3 situations where a VP of sales or a sales director with a great track record of success in other companies. Let me say this again: 3 situations in 3 different companies, all industrial. They come in and they get tasked with, having some oversight over marketing and service. Their mandates are typically sales mandates, and they optimize on sales outcomes. It could be because of their backgrounds. It could be because that's how they know how to win. But I've never seen, it's always ended up in a disaster. It's not working okay. It's always ended up in disaster because typically their sales background and their sales mandate just leads them to either disregarding or making the wrong decisions in marketing and service. What I can't claim to have the solution, but I've seen 3 data points saying you cannot take a sales leader and tell them now you got marketing and service. You need someone who has the mindset of revenue operations is one team with 3 flavors, and that everybody's working together, and that if any part breaks down, then the whole breaks down. Then you can be successful. And that's why I feel having this new name, this rebrand, I know marketers love giving new names to old things, but having the name that's not affiliated with a sales, or don't even call it sales and marketing, just call it revenue, have people ask what does that mean? And then there's an opportunity for education, saying it's a situation where sales, marketing, and service are all on the same level and need the same amount of attention so everybody can win. Again, I haven't been in a situation where the sales leader has succeeded in that. I've only seen disaster. That's why my reflex is saying no.
Yeah. And this is why. So I'm basically I'm calling us practitioners, consultants, agencies, all the people that want very badly to help these organizations. When you call it something to fit into the old mold, you just run into inherent problems. Okay, if it's sales operations, they naturally have sales goals. They're going to care about sales things. And even if they tell me they have a new state of mind and they are open to, letting everybody play, I might not be educated now. And I still have my view of what I think they want. Right. And you mentioned, and this can happen whether it's marketing, IT, so whoever owns it, that label is going to bring baggage with it. unless you have the best of cultures with the best of transparency and communication, which a lot of these companies that are successful doing this, they have that, and that's why they can transition. Um, but you mentioned earlier, like when you do switch to RevOps, like that person is going to need to, um, answer to the CEO, right? Or the C-suite in some way, answer to leadership, right? So when you take that role out, right, and you're thinking about going that direction, that doesn't remove the leadership responsibility to make sure this is getting done, right? So that's where like best, like worst case scenario, you're creating a type of committee where none of these labels are the ones in charge. The CEO is in charge of making sure the thing. And this is where it's so inherently valuable to the business. It should not be, it should be just as valuable as the P&L in terms of the CEO needs direct line of sight and needs to understand, what's happening. And we as practitioners need to push them, I think, in that direction and at least get better at highlighting the problems that come with using like some old terminologies, right? And getting clear, like there's nuance to all of this, and that's why the words we use are so important. And just understanding, like, why do these companies all have CROs now, chief revenue officers, right? It's because it's like, if you think about revenue teams and then what you need to help that team operate, it can be you can get to some very clean org structures very quickly if you can just allow yourself to shed some of these older terms, right? So that's kind of my take. And, that's our goal with this podcast. And as we, try to help educate, it's to take the kid gloves off at times and say, hey, like, we understand why that might be easier to do for you and for all the people that you have to manage. Like at the end of the day, that's the challenge for you as a leader. But here's what's going to happen if you keep doing that. Like we're talking about AI. Until you do this, until you start to digitally, you can't touch AI. Like if you haven't digitally transformed yet, you cannot touch that and you're not going to get any value out of it. So instead of moving like finding yourself 50 years behind the curve as people adopt AI, like these are the kind of tough decisions that, you got to be making, you got to be at least considering, right, as a leader.
Yeah. And yeah, I think there's two approaches here. So the first is, what is the ideal state? And this is, I think what you two have already kind of laid out. RevOps, standalone, needs to have high power, whether it is because it's going to be cross-functional, could be operating as a center of excellence or as a team or however you need to structure it. The reason I mentioned potentially having to do, and I phrase it as having to do, is there may have to be some progress over perfection. And in some companies, we may have a marketing leader or we may have a CEO listening that's not going to work. And what I don't want them to do is say, okay, it's not going to work enough, let's move on. All right. Progress over perfection, you might need to start somewhere. But Selim, to your point, if it's buried in the sales team, it has a higher likelihood of failing. And I will 100% endorse that mindset. You can call it marketing operations and have it in marketing. You can call it whatever you want and put it wherever you want. Ideally, it's not going to be encumbered by team structure because your CRM and some of your other systems are not within one team. And that's the problem. Chris, to your point, you said, hey, if you think about what the customer needs and how you interact with them, then you look at kind of trickle down from there. How should we orient our org structures around those interactions? You probably get significantly different org structures than what are in use today. This might just be the call that says, it's time to innovate and it's going to be hard. And there are big picture changes that have to be done. And it is much bigger than just who owns a system. You can start there, but that's sort of backing into the bigger question, right? Which is, how do you serve the customer? And who owns the CRM falls under that bigger picture question. And what changes do you need to make right now or over the next 12 to 24 to 36 months? Because change takes time. It can go faster for smaller companies, but we've been in, larger companies. You will have red tape. You will have lots of buy-in. You will have many meetings to figure this out. But how are you going to evolve? Right? Digital transformation is a big word. It is a buzzword, but it exists for a reason. And a lot of the transformation is not just, oh, let's become more digital. It is, how do we serve a modern customer that expects you to fit their expectations? Because those expectations have dramatically shifted, even specifically in the manufacturing space. Those same people still go home and buy something on Amazon. Their expectations have changed too.
That is a great way to close this out. It does, like, these conversations are like, how would you do this if you had to do it from scratch right now? If you can orient yourself around the customer, literally everything you have to be doing right now gets significantly easier. So thank you for bringing it around.
Caleb, this was a very refreshing conversation, and I know we can keep going on and on. And we would love to have you again on the podcast. But until then, where can people find you on the internet?
I am active on LinkedIn. I do not post that often, so if you're looking for somebody to give you lots of wisdom, go follow Selim and Chris because they post more often than I do. I will comment though, so I'm active there. It's CALEBRULE for those I don't have my name tag. And then obviously over at Strativise, which is the company where I am digital director as well. And then calebbrule.com is just personal information. You're not going to get sold anything. It's literally just, here's like my resume, basically. It's a portfolio site. But if you just want to say hi or kind of check me out a little bit further, those are your three best places. If you're a marketer and you're also in Dave Gerhardt's Exit 5 community, I am active in there as well. But carrier pigeon, smoke signal, you want to find me, I will certainly try to answer the call. But I've certainly enjoyed being on. This has likewise been refreshing for me to talk, and would love to come back on and to have a part two.
We will include all the links Caleb mentioned in the show notes and comment sections. Otherwise, thank you everyone for joining us for this episode, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye.
Thanks so much, Caleb.